Hi, welcome to Books and Bocadillos. My name is Maria Andrea, and this is my Thursday night poetry series video for the first week in June. And it is a bit delayed. It is Sunday, not Thursday, but wanted to make it out here and post the first video in this Thursday night poetry series that will hopefully continue for the next Thursdays of the month of June. And for the month of June, I am inspired by Michael K. Vaughan's event, June on the Range. I am participating in June on the Range, what I call Rogue Edition. Um, I am inspired by Western literature, Western stories, um, the landscape of Westerns, the nature of Westerns, the cultural complications of Westerns, and I'm here to try to read to you some poetry inspired by a little bit of all of that. So I want to start out by reading from this book. I have my notes, so as I'm looking down, I'm looking at my notes. So this, I don't know if you can see it, there might be a glare. The title of this poetry anthology is Poetry of the American West, a Columbia anthology, edited by Alison Hawthorne Deming. I want to read from the intro to this because when I first got my hands on this poetry collection, when I read the introduction, I thought, yes, this is how I want to start my poetry series. Excuse me. So, in the preface of this anthology, the editor, Alison Hawthorne Deming, writes, "What the land has inspired." Excuse me. To experience the American West is to be moved by the power and beauty of the land, from the rosy rimrock of Utah's canyonlands to the forested flanks of the Rockies and Cascades, from the flowering starkland of the Mojave and Sonoran deserts to the hard-working Pacific that shapes California's elegant coast. But for the scrupulous contemporary observer, no American landscape can be seen without also seeing the history of people's relationship with the land and with one another. Historically, the Western landscape, characterized by its open space and aridity, has exacted a price from those who would know it, and it has been inhabited by a particularly brutal history of cultural collisions. I undertook the project of this anthology in order to find out what the poetry of the American West had to contribute to our understanding of that history. In considering this project, I found no current anthology of Western poetry that offered a sufficient breadth of inquiry. Though many fine ones have been published in recent years, they tend to be narrowly committed to a single regional or cultural perspective. Anthologies of Montana, Oregon, or Nevada poets, American Indian or Latino poets, cowboy and ranch women poets, all fine projects making valuable contributions by highlighting specific strengths and directions in poetry. Yet none offered an integrated vision of poetry of the West. None worked toward creating a communal sense of Western poetics that might include regional, aesthetic, and cultural difference. By taking a thematic focus as my editorial bias, I have worked with the intention of crossing regional aesthetic and cultural borders. I should add that I have favored American Indian throughout the anthology as the generic term of choice for the native tribal people of what is now the United States. Throughout the anthology as a generic term of choice for the native tribal people, okay, what is now the United States, though this term is too general to encompass the rich and diverse tribal heritage of our continent, and though it derives from the mistaken apprehension of early European explorers that they had landed in India. Nevertheless, American Indian, or simply Indian, is currently the term in most common usage among both scholars of the West and tribal people. The anthologist's first problem is that of definition. What is the West? Where and when does it begin? To Philip Phenome, writing in New York in the 1700s, it was Ohio. Willa Cather's frontier was situated in Nebraska. To Lorna de Cervantes and Adrienne Rich, the freeways of the depleted croplands of California define the western frontier. The definition of the West changes over time. It is both the place and the process of people immigrating to that place. The West is a construction of Easterners. If you live in Mexico, the West is actually the North. If you live in Canada, the West is to the South. To keep myself within somewhat fixed boundaries, I chose to work with the geography from the 100th meridian to the West Coast, from the Mexican border to the Canadian border. These borders, particularly the US-Mexico border, have been fixed in their present locations for a relatively short time. Historically speaking, I crossed the border to include Nahuatl flower songs from the Aztec world of ancient Mexico, technically not American poetry, yet providing a poetic remnant of the great cultural flowering whose influence radiated into what we know as the American Southwest. This raised the question of defining the very idea of Western poetic tradition. Excuse me. The antecedents to contemporary Western poetry are broad and varied and represent not merely different cultures and regions, but different functions. The sacred songs of the Aztecs, the epic poems of Gaspar Perez de Villagra and John Neihardt, the protest poems of the Chicano farm workers movement, the meditations of Theodore Rothke, cowboy songs traded around the campfire, and the imagistic romantic lyrics of Robert Haas and Joy Harjo may differ dramatically in form and intended function, yet in theme they have in common the need to give shape and meaning to one's experience of the land and the land's authority. Rather than being definitive, then, this anthology is intended to be impressionistic, a poet's reading of the fluid traditions and directions of poetry of the American West. Beyond the general thematic consideration, my editorial taste has been guided by several principles. I have wanted the anthology to offer a broad aesthetic range, including genteel verse, tribal song, political and protest poems, balladry, populist poems such as cowboy songs and corridos, and work championing both traditional and exploratory literary forms. I have wanted to represent the new democracy in American poetry. I believe we are hearing more good poems from a wider cultural range of the American people than ever in history. The current flourishing of American Indian and Latino writing, for example, is unprecedented. Where such new voices will lead the art, I do not know, but clearly they will lead it somewhere, not merely follow what has been done before. I have wanted to hear what some of our best poets have had to say about the West and their relationship with it, and I have wanted to place those poems in conversations with one another. I have therefore omitted many bland and familiar chestnuts of popular Western poetry in favor of work with more serious literary intent or of a distinctive and quirky voice. And I have worked to select a group of poems that will serve the reader in two ways. First, as a reference book, this collection provides many points of access for those seeking a path into the unfamiliar terrain of Western poetry. Second, as a whole, the anthology tells a story about the West that I believe is instructive for our present predicament. We know that the old story of the West, the story of manifest destiny, of westering, when the land we've lived on becomes too crowded or tainted with our mistakes, of rugged individualism against harsh circumstances and savage foes, is dead. The world has grown smaller than it was when the story was told. The trees fewer, the water table lower, and the Western population larger and increasingly more international. The great dangers of the wild rarely feel so dangerous to us any longer. In fact, we long for our own wildness. As John Daniel and David Wagner remind us, and for the spiritual lessons wilderness can teach, the life that early Westerners fought so hard for, the one that meant taking a living out of the land, taking a living out of the land as a rancher, miner, or logger, is eroding with the rootless soil on clear-cut hillsides and is being replaced by the equally rootless life of tourism and recreational industry. We feel the sorry moral consequences of our ancestors' deeds as a burden, not a heroic legacy. Everywhere we look, in the wilds and in the city, the land is stained with human blood. The new story of the West is just beginning to be written, part eulogy to the past, part rage at its injustices, part imaginative retelling of the past, so that we understand how our collective character has been formed, part the good American optimism in the ideal of freedom, freedom earned not as a cost of communal well-being, but in its service. So I'm going to dedicate this video to sharing with you poetry from North American Indian tribes. And I am going to start with the, the region of northern Mexico. And that region was occupied by the Nahuatl tribe, the Nahuatl language. The Nahuatl language is one of the largest indigenous languages in Mexico. And it's from the collection Poetry of the American West. And this is called Elegy. This is from Nahuatl 16th century poetry. And the note here says, among the testimonies about the conquest recorded in song by the Aztecs is this ignocuitical elegy or sad song, not attributed to an individual poet. This is elegy. And all this happened to us. We saw it. We marveled at it. With this sad and mournful destiny, we saw ourselves afflicted. On the roads lie broken arrows. Our hair is in disarray. Without roofs are the houses, and red are their walls with blood. Worms multiply in the streets and squares, and on the walls brains are spattered. Red are the waters as if they were dyed, and when we drink, it seems water of saltpeter. We have struggled against the walls of adobe, but our heritage was a net made of holes. Our shields were our protection, but not even with shields could we defend ourselves. We have eaten branches of linné. We have chewed upon salty witchgrass, bits of adobe and ground earth, small lizards, rats, worms. We ate meat when it was scarcely on the fire. When the meat was cooked, we snatched it out of the very coals and ate it. They put a price on us. The price for a young person, for a priest, a child, or a young girl. And it was enough for a common man. The price was only 2 handfuls of corn, or 10 portions of caked mosquitoes. Our price was only 20 portions of salty witchgrass. Gold, jade, rich mantles, plumage of quetzal, all that has value was then counted as nothing. This was translated from the Spanish by Miguel León Portilla and Grace Lobanoff. And from here I want to jump to the next poem, but I want to highlight the phrase, when it says they put a price on us. The price was only 2 handfuls of corn. Corn, also in the Spanish, called maize or maize, M-A-I-Z-E, is a word for corn. And corn was a very valuable resource to the Native American people, to the American and North American Indians where corn was able to grow. And it was priceless. It was of value. And so the next poetry that I want to read is from this collection. It is titled Like a New Sun, New Indigenous Mexican Poetry, edited by Victor Teran and David Shook. I absolutely love this cover art. So this next poem is titled Maize Flower. I say maize because that's the Spanish and that's how it sounds right to me. But this is page 64. Okay. What I like about this is that it has, on one side, it has the Nahuatl language, and then on the other side, it has the translated. I'm going to read the translated. So this is Maize Flower 1. Tender green corn upon the great sea. Maquilosochil unloads her shawl. The barbed corn blooms, gilded sand flower. The house of dew is dressed with flowers, only hymns and holy melodies. 2. The sun's hair flames over the body of maize. Zilonen has blossomed, the small grained flame has sprung. Flower of fire, our tender flesh, house of precious flowers. Red, black, white, yellow, the hues of her skin. Choice kernel of corn. Santiotolo adorns her head with flowers. The blossoming maize flower sings. The jaded hummingbird drunken with flowers. Yellow flowers on the altar, candle light, copal smoke, sowing consecrated. For earth, one offering of drink, for man, another. For abundance, flowers. Earth open, it receives the choice seed. 5. It slept in night's furrow, rain's dew awakes the corn stalk. It lives in the wind's house, it grows in the land of light, in Xochiquetzal's bosom, green leaves like a butterfly. 6. The quetzal lives into flight, the maize leaf shudders in the green earth of rainy season, the tree of light grows, the flower bird already sings, leaves open to life. 7. Corn child lives in the sun's house, life's living gold, yellow seed of corn, green moon leaves tremble beneath the afternoon light. The necklace of flowers is complete. The hummingbird has flown. That was Maize Flower. A few of the footnotes here that I want to share. So, Macuilxochitl is Five Flower, is a pre-Columbian reference to a female Nahuatl poet from the 14th century and the patron god of writing and painting. So that is who the poem refers to in the first line, tender green corn upon the great sea, Macuilxochitl unloads her shawl. In part 2, the footnote is, the reference is Silonen or Citeotlo, hilote in Spanish, or green spike of maize, refers to when the kernels of Chicomexochil, the seventh flower of the book's title, are soft and just beginning to bud. Silonen or hilonen, hilote. Silonen is also a pre-Columbian reference to the feminine side of Senteotl, maize god, which appears in the following poem. And those are all the footnotes. Oh no, there's one more. In part 5, Xochiquetzal is a flowery quetzal bird or flowery preciousness. It's a pre-Columbian allusion to the patron goddess of the arts. And that is the reference in part 5 that reads, "It grows in the land of light in Xochiquetzal's bosom." That's it. So that was Maize Flower or Maize Flower from Like a New Sun. Next, I want to read an excerpt from An Indigenous People's History of the United States. This is from the chapter titled Sea to Shining Sea. Okay. U.S. overseas imperialism. Traversing the continent from sea to shining sea was hardly a natural westward procession of covered wagons as portrayed in Western movies. The U.S. invasion of Mexico was carried out by U.S. Marines by the sea, through Veracruz, and the early colonization of California initially progressed from the Pacific coast, reached from the Atlantic coast by way of Tierra del Fuego. Between the Mississippi River and the Rockies lay a vast region controlled by indigenous nations that were neither conquered nor colonized by any European power. And although the United States managed to annex northern Mexico, large numbers of settlers could not reach the northern California gold fields or the fertile Willamette Valley region of the Pacific Northwest without army regiments accompanying them. Why then does the popular U.S. historical narrative of a quote-unquote natural westward movement persist? The answer is that those who still hold to the narrative remain captives of the ideology of manifest destiny, according to which the United States expanded across the continent to assume its preordained size and shape. This ideology normalizes the successive invasions and occupations of indigenous nations and Mexico as not being colonialist or imperialist, rather simply ordained progress. In this view, Mexico was just another Indian nation to be crushed. I'm going to just pause it there, but it goes on to explain how the tribes from Mexico, from like the Aztec tribes up to the North American continent, were highly developed. A lot of these civilizations were highly developed civilizations. They had roads, they had ways of communicating, they had relationships, they migrated, they traveled, there was a flow of traffic, they traded, they were in conflict as well. But families like expanded the large region, the vast region. And so it was not empty land, as you know, we tend to be taught in school that that it was wild and uncivilized. Their civilizations were very smart. They were highly developed. They had systems in place, and families, tribes, like I said, flowed a vast region. So when boundaries were put in place, it split nations and tribes and families. It separated. It caused divisions. The borders caused for divisions to happen and separation, and then acculturation and different cultures developed from that. So having in mind how vast the Aztec Empire's influence was, I thought I would share, because a lot of just the Aztec civilization that moved through, and there were other what we now know as like North American or American Indian tribes that were related to the Aztec nation, or the Aztec nations. I want to just travel as well, migrate as well, go with the flow of the migration of these tribes, and keep going up north to some of the American Indian tribes. From the Hopi Nation, I want to read Song of Creation. There's a small intro to this here. It says, American Indian songs. This is late 19th to mid 20th century. The work of anthropologists, ethnologists, linguists, and other researchers from the late 19th to the mid 20th century resulted in the gathering of prodigious range of traditional Indian songs from hundreds of tribes. The act of transcribing the songs entailed not only the risks of inaccurate translation, but the further diminishment of separating the words from their ritual purposes. What follows is a modest sampling from those materials, presented with the caution that these selections can convey only a shadow of the rich oral tradition of American Indian song, prayer, and storytelling. Excuse me. From the Hopi Nation, this is Song of Creation. The dark purple light rises in the north, a yellow light rises in the east. Then we of the flowers of the earth come forth to receive a long life of joy. We call ourselves the butterfly maidens. Both male and female make their prayers to the east, make this respectful sign to the sun, our creator. The sounds of bells ring through the air, making a joyful sound throughout the land, their joyful echo resounding everywhere. Humbly I ask my Father, the perfect one, Taoa, our Father, the perfect one, creating the beautiful life shown to us by the yellow light, to give us perfect light at the time of the red light. The perfect one laid out the perfect plan and gave to us a long span of life, creating song to implant joy in life. On this path of happiness, we, the butterfly maidens, carry out his wishes by greeting our Father Sun. The song resounds back from our Creator with joy, and we of the earth repeat it to our Creator. At the appearing of the yellow light, repeats and repeats again the joyful echo, sounds and resounds for times to come. This was translated by Frank Waters. Then I want to read from the same collection American Indian songs. This is Tohono o Odam Owl Woman. This is a healing song. Brown owls come here in the blue evening. They are hooting about. They are shaking their wings and hooting. How shall I begin my song in the blue night that is settling? I will sit here and begin my song. The owl feather is rolling in this direction and beginning to sing. The people listen and come to hear the owl feather rolling in this direction and beginning to sing. Early in the evening they come hooting about. Some have small voices and some have large voices. Some have voices of medium strength hooting about. I cannot make out what I see. In the dark I enter. I cannot make out what I see. Poor old sister, you have cared for this man and you want to see him again, but now his heart is almost covered with night. There is just a little left. Ahead of me some owl feathers are lying. I hear something running toward me. They pass by me, and further ahead I see spirit tufts of downy white feathers. Yonder lies the spirit land. Yonder the spirit land I see. Farther ahead in front of me I see a spirit stand. In the great night my heart will go out. Toward me the darkness comes rattling. In the great night my heart will go out. This is translated by Francis Dinsmore. And there's a footnote here to this poem. It says, Owl woman, whose Spanish name was Juana Maxwell, was a traditional Papago healer from San Javier in Arizona. She was given her songs by spirits returned from the dead, and she used them in treatment of the sick. She reported that the dead stayed near their graves during the day, but at night they went to the spirit land by a road that was not far away. Only the spirits knew its location. I got the chills reading this one. And then a Cherokee love song. I thought I'd end with a love song. This is a Cherokee love song by John Rollin Ridge, a Yellow Bird. 1827 to 1867, and about the author, or the poet. Born in the Cherokee Nation east of Mississippi to a Cherokee father and a white mother, Ridge was called by his grandfather Chisquatalani, or Yellowbird. In 1839, his grandfather and father were murdered by Cherokees in retaliation for their role in the loss of the tribal homeland to the whites. Ridge was educated briefly in Massachusetts, later in a missionary school in Arkansas, where he studied Latin and Greek. In 1849, Ridge killed a Cherokee who allegedly had attacked him. As a result of old family grievances, he fled to California in the gold rush, working as a miner and trader, then as a journalist publishing articles and poems under the name Yellow Bird. A Cherokee love song. Oh, come with me by moonlight, love, and let us seek the river shore. My light canoe awaits thee, love, the sweetest burden ere it bore. The soft low winds are whispering there of human beauty, human love, and with approving faces too, the stars are shining from above. Come place thy small white hand in mine, my boat is 'neath those willow trees, and with my practiced arm the oar will ask no favor from the breeze. Now we're on the waters, love, alone upon the murmuring tide, alone, but why should we regret if there were none on earth beside? What matters it if all were gone? Thy bird-like voice could yet beguile, and earth were heaven's substitute, if thou were left to make it smile. O mark how soft the dipping oar that silent cleaves the yielding blue. O list the low, sweet melody of waves that beat our vessel too. O look to heaven, how pure it seems, no cloud to dim, no blot, no stain, and say, if we refuse to love, ought we to hope or smile again? That island green with roses gemmed, let's seek it, love, how sweet a spot. Then let the hours of night speed on, we live to love, it matters not. The next poem was really eye-catching. I was tempted to read it, but I will leave it there because I wanted to end with a love song. That is all for today. Just wanted to start by acknowledging the North American Indians, whose land was the western frontier that the colonizers took, stole, inhabited. Thank you for watching. Next week in this Thursday Poetry series, I will be sharing more poetry inspired by the Western frontier. Hasta la próxima.